Good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. We're going to be continuing our study in the book of John. We're looking at the first part of chapter 8 tonight. I will have all of our verses on the screen so you can follow along. As always, this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ, located in Columbus, Mississippi. And our website is scrolling below me. It's northcolumbuschristians.com. And we also put these videos up on our YouTube page. It's North Columbus Church of Christ, and you can subscribe to our page. And all of our previous videos have been uploaded to our YouTube page as well. So we've been looking through the book of John, and really what we see is Jesus is in Jerusalem. He's talking to these Pharisees. The Pharisees have some problems with what he's doing, what he's saying. For example, they have a problem with him healing on the Sabbath. Not a problem necessarily with the healing, but the fact that he's doing it on the Sabbath, and so there's some issues with that, and so that kind of and so that is the context here. Really, what's going on as we move into chapter 8. And we'll start off reading verses 1 through 5. It says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what do you say?'" So Jesus has been doing miracles. He's also been teaching, and really and I don't have it here, but in verse 6, we'll see the true intentions of why the scribes and Pharisees brought this woman to Jesus. Now she's caught in adultery, and notice what the law says, and so rightly they will say that according to the law, she should be stoned. And so they're asking him, "Well, what do you say?" And obviously, when we're reading that, why are they asking what Jesus' opinion is on it? And it is kind of revealing because he is saying things. We look at other gospels and what he is saying, that he will make several statements, but then Jesus will say, "But I say unto you," that there's something more here. For example, with adultery, he will say that adultery begins in the heart. And so even laying a greater law, or at least a greater definition of what adultery looks like, that it's not just a physical act itself, but we also have to be, well, I say that it is a physical act, but adultery begins in the heart. And if we are looking after a woman or looking after another person, lusting after that person, that in and of itself is adultery, not a physical act, but we see that it's already in our mind, and even that is a problem. And so he's made these statements before. We know that he's been teaching things that, at least in the Pharisees' eyes, they might see that it was contrary to the law. But we see that here they're asking what should happen to this woman that was caught in adultery. And in verse 6, it says, "This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him." And I'll stop there quickly. And so again, this is why they're doing that. They're not really wanting to know what he has to say about this, but they're wanting to catch him up in something. Maybe he will say something that would be contradicting the law, uh, or saying something of effect that again would be able to accuse him of something, maybe disobeying the law. Maybe in some situations that they even go so far as to try to set him up as opposing the Roman government as well. So they're all the time trying to accuse him, and this is again another one of those examples. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and a woman standing in the midst. So we see how Jesus responds. He doesn't say, yes, stone her, or no, no, stone her, or anything of that nature. But his response is to say, well, first he acts as though he doesn't hear them. But then later on, he says, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And I think and we haven't got to it yet, and I may be getting ahead of myself. But here Jesus is making a point with them. And we see the point being made when they hear what he's saying, and these people being convicted by their conscience. That they are trying to, stone her, that they see what she's done, but yet they have sinned as well. And so they are guilty as well, and this is what's going on with them being convicted by their conscience, that they know they've sinned. Now recognize that might not have sinned to the point of adultery, that is according to the law that they should be stoned, but they're still guilty. And so they go out until finally Jesus is left alone with this woman. So another interesting encounter with the Jews here, and how an interesting answer by Jesus, that he doesn't answer them in the way in which they expect. They think, if you're familiar with the Bible, you will know that the Jews, the Pharisees, they set Jesus up in multiple cases, trying to get him to answer in such a way in which they can finally just nail him with something that will show the people that he's a fraud, and they never are successful. And so Jesus here is making a good point that those people that are accusing this woman, they are sinners as well. And so we go to verses 10 through 13. It says, when Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. So they all leave. And Jesus asks, where are the accusers? Has no one condemned you? Of course, she answers, no one, Lord. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now, we do have to be careful with this, and I keep referencing stuff that's going that we'll be looking at later on in the lesson. But oftentimes when we get into a situation or a situation of calling out sin or recognizing right versus wrong, a lot of times you'll hear this reference to this woman, and Jesus saying that neither do I condemn you. And so they would reference this or reference the passage where Jesus says, judge not. And that basically one should just never say anything about somebody else or never quote unquote judge. But notice what he does say here. He says, go and sin no more. He recognizes that she's sinned. I think that she's recognizing that she's sinned. And he's saying that, and he's not condemning her to what the law requires, but he is saying, don't continue living in this. So in a sense, he is making a judgment on her, but he's telling her to make a change. He's telling her to repent of those things and no longer living like that. And so this is one of those passages in which we do have to be careful here, that I don't think Jesus is not just excusing her sin there and not just saying, oh, well, it's no big deal. No, this is not what he's saying. But I think that he's using this opportunity to make a bigger point to the Pharisees, that she's sinned, the Pharisees have sinned. They're all sinners. And I think Jesus would tell all of them to sin no more, to make a change, to stop living like this. And I think, this is what Jesus here is trying to say. But continuing on, he says, then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I'm the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but I have the light of life. The Pharisees therefore said to him, "You bear witness of yourself. Your witness is not true." So Jesus here says, "I'm the light of the world. If you follow me, you're not going to walk in darkness." I think this is a good uh, good reference back to just what we looked at when he tells this woman, "Go and sin no more." If you follow me, you shall not walk in darkness. We can look at multiple passages in the New Testament talking about following Jesus and imitating Jesus and what that looks like. And if we're called to be imitators of Jesus, we're going to be acting like him, and we're not going to be walking in darkness. We're not going to be living in sin. But here, they're not going to walk in darkness. They're done with the things of the world. They're not going to be living in sin. But he says, "I have the light of life." If we want life, if we want true life, we have to come him. And he's contrasting that concept with light and darkness, as he does in multiple places. But notice what the Pharisees say. They're basically calling him a liar. He says, "You're just bearing witness of yourself, and your witness is not true. You're a liar. You're making these claims, and it's just simply not true." And it takes us to verses 14 through 20. It says, "Jesus answered and said to them, Even if I bear witness of myself, my witness is true, for I know where I came from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from and where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one, and yet if I do judge, my judgment is true, for I am not alone, but I am with the Father who sent me." Notice what Jesus here is saying. He says, "I'm bearing witness of myself. My witness is true." He says, I'm telling the truth. But he says, "For I know where I came from and where I'm going." And what we'll look at is we'll see several statements made by him of his interaction and relationship with the Father. He says, and he's basically saying, "I came from heaven and I'm going back to heaven. I know where I'm from, but you don't know where I'm from." But notice this next statement here, and again, this was what I was referencing back to this idea of judgment. He says, "You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one." So wait a minute now. Is he's saying that the Pharisees are judging according to the flesh? So obviously that's wrong. So this is going to be imperfect judgment, also not impartial judgment. And when you think of the case of the woman that's been caught in adultery, I think what in many other cases, the problem with the Pharisees is that they can so easily see the sins of others, but they couldn't see the sin within themselves. And I think that's what another reason why the people were so convicted with what Jesus said to them in regards to that woman that was caught in adultery, that they recognized, at least for a moment, the sin within themselves. But is he saying that he doesn't judge anybody, that this is not coming? Well, in later on, we'll read some statements where he says, I am bringing judgment. And so he's bringing judgment. He judges. He calls on believers to judge righteous judgment. And so I think what he's saying here in the statement, "I judge no one," is that he's saying he's not judging people like what the Pharisees are doing. That he's not doing this imperfect, this partial judgment, or just kind of hypocritical judgment. And so in that case, that's not the case. He's issuing true judgment. Notice what he says: if I do judge, my judgment is true. So if I do make a judgment, it's going to be based in truth, in the reality of the situation. It's not going to be like the judging that the Pharisees are doing. But he says, "For I am not alone, but I am with the Father who sent me." Again, another statement talking about who Jesus is, where he came from, and what he's about. He says that I am with the Father who sent me. We are both on the same wavelength. We're both about the same business, and it is the Father who sent him. He's not just some guy who just showed up and is saying the right words. He's saying God himself sent Jesus. Continuing on, he says, "It is also written in your law that the testimony of two men is true. I am one who bears witness of myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness of me." And they said to him, "Where is your father?" Jesus answered, "You know neither me nor my Father. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also." These words Jesus spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no one laid hands on him, for his hour had not yet come. So Jesus is saying, okay, well, the testimony of two men is true, and he lays out that he's bearing witness of himself, but then he says the Father is also bearing witness of him. And we have to think, how is the Father bearing witness of him? Well, in some cases, the Father is audibly bearing witness of him, saying, "This is my beloved Son." Believe him. We see those instances in the Gospels, but remember that the miracles that Jesus is performing is bearing witness of him too. We see that in Hebrews, that God bore witness through those miracles. And so God bore witness in the actual words that he said that others could hear, and also through those miracles, because if somebody's performing those miracles, they have to be from God. They could not do those things in and of themselves. And so Jesus is saying that he's bearing witness and the Father has borne witness. So that means that his testimony, since the testimony of two men is true, according to our law, they have to pay attention to Jesus, because that requirement has been met. Then they said to him, "Where is your father?" And so, of course, they're thinking of an earthly father. They're thinking, well, who's this father that he's talking about? And notice what Jesus answered. He says, "You know neither me nor my Father. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also." This is a very strong statement, accusation here by Jesus. He's saying, so the Jews here would say that obviously they believe God. They're following his law. They believe his word. But Jesus is saying that you really don't believe God here. He says, "You know neither me nor my Father." And why does he make that statement? He says, "If you had known me, you would have known my Father also." So you can't have one or the other. You can't have the Father. You can't claim that you know the Father, but then you also don't know Jesus. Okay. And so, if you're claiming that you know Jesus and truly know Jesus, you must also know God as well. And so, they're making that claim that they know God the Father. Well, they're rejecting the Christ. They're rejecting uh, the Son here, and so that is a rejection of the Father as well. And so he's saying you don't really know him. If you did, you would have known me. And so he's and again he's making clear what is the Jews, the Pharisees' problems here, that they're rejecting him. They simply won't believe. Reminded of Stephen and what he says in Acts chapter 7, that there is a continuous story with Israel and the Jews, is that they continually reject God's chosen. They reject his prophets, and they reject Christ as well. They're stiff necked, and they're are just unfaithful people. And we see this with Jesus, that he would love for them to believe, but they simply refuse to, given all the evidence that they could possibly want for, and yet they still choose not to believe. And so we'll continue on in chapter 8, and Jesus will continue to make statements about who he is and what the problem with the Jews are, and why. And it's interesting again how they just adamantly refuse Jesus. And I think it's cautionary for us that they were actually seeing what he's doing, and they reject him. And it would be much easier for us to reject him, I think, given that we don't see those things. And so we have to caution, and we have to make sure that we are we're looking at these things critically, looking at this evidence and making those conclusions, and truly follow him. Don't just follow him in pretense and just maybe just in our actions, but truly be devoted to him. And so we're going to stop there this evening. If there's any questions or comments, feel free to leave that here. And we'll just keep on working through John. I always say it seems like that we try to do these weekly, and it seems like it doesn't work out. But we'll keep on trying to make that our goal to do these every Sunday evening, and we'll just continue through John. And when we get done, we get done. But also, as a reminder, we'll be putting these videos up on YouTube for anyone to see at a later date. But I hope this has been useful for everybody. And until next time, I hope that you all have a good day, a good rest of the week. Thanks.